Consider the act of listening. In a world saturated with visual stimuli, the resurgence of audio, particularly podcasts, is noteworthy. Right now, there are more podcast listeners in the US than ever before. Why? Is it the quest for knowledge, the need for companionship during solitary tasks, or is it something more profound, a yearning for authentic dialogue? The tone of a podcaster is instantly recognizable. Take Lex Fridman. Every episode he publishes opens and closes with a monologue.
We live in an era of online discourse where grifters, drama farmers, liars, bots, sycophants, and sociopaths roam the vast, beautiful dark land of the internet.
Fridman's soliloquies are thoughtful, earnest, sometimes self-important.
Now, at this moment in history, it is clear, at least to me, that the flourishing of human civilization hangs in the balance.
The 41-year-old podcaster has built an audience of nearly 5 million listeners. When he began 6 years ago, his subjects were almost exclusively tech academics. Now, his interviews span the globe's most influential figures.
The following is a conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu.
Trump, Netanyahu, Modi have all sat down with him. This puts Fridman alongside podcast giants like Joe Rogan and Theo Von, men with mics who collectively reach 160 million listeners every month.
So the reason these podcast formats appeal to them is that it's an opportunity to go to this friendlier environment. It's often much more casual in tone, and they know they're not going to get the same kind of challenging questions that they're going to get in a traditional journalist environment.
Do you ever get tired? What's your source of strength and perseverance through all of that?
So the downside of the long-form podcast is that oftentimes with a lot of hosts, it's not overly challenging. Doesn't mean that they don't ask good questions or smart questions, but overall politicians like Trump can walk around some of these answers pretty easily.
And by the way, the statistics were a fraud.
Because it's not an aggressive, challenging style of interview. On the other hand, what it does allow you to do is see a human being for 3 hours talking to another human being. And there's actually great value in that.
I did Dr. Phil the other day.
I saw it.
The laid-back, seemingly less pressured podcast space was where Donald Trump focused his efforts during his bid for the presidency in 2024.
It's going to be great.
I think so too,
I've
Mr. Trump.
this all my life.
All right, we're rolling. Good to see you, sir. Here we go.
Trump did interviews with 14 different podcasters during the election campaign. By comparison, his rival, Democratic candidate Kamala Harris, did just 6 podcast interviews. Trump's blitz meant his interviews were fed into the headphones of more than 65 million listeners.
We'll do it again. I want to do it again with you.
Joe Rogan's interview with Donald Trump was the most listened to podcast episode on Spotify by far. His interview on YouTube was seen, I think, 55 million times, which is just a tremendously large number. No doubt that interview and other interviews like it played an enormous role in Trump's ability to reach the large audiences who he was trying to get to turn out to vote, which are, men, in a way that allowed him to circumvent traditional news media outlets, avoid difficult questions.
By the 2024 election, a lot of TV journalism in the US had made a very conscious decision not to just put Trump's speeches live on the air, to not just give him this unmediated, freewheeling access to the audience, and to just sort of say whatever he wanted, unfact-checked in the moment. When the Trump team realized there was this other space where he could just go for hours and say whatever he wanted without being fact-checked, they really took advantage of that.
Podcasts have risen on the horizon of a media landscape in flux. For decades, there's been a growing sense that corporate media echoes the establishment rather than challenging it. Access is traded for favorable coverage, and as political polarization has sharpened, media credibility has tanked even further. Trump waded into this debate and turbocharged it.
You are fake news. I find the press is extremely dishonest, and if I'm not combative, I don't get my word across.
A segment of the audience that fled the mainstream news scene the fastest was people in their mid-30s, and it's clear where they moved. 66% of podcast listeners in the US are 34 or younger. Ironically, many of the podcasters they are listening to, especially if they are on the political right, are former mainstream media personalities.
Let's piss them off.
Unleashed from whatever newsroom norms that might have kept them in check.
When you're on television, there's guardrails. I was a host on MSNBC and then on Current TV. And there were certain things that you couldn't talk about, boundaries you couldn't go past. So now you can do content that is directly appealing to the audience. You're giving the audience what you really think, and you're getting to have broader conversations. The downside is, well, there are also sometimes no factual guardrails. So you've got more freedom, but also more chaos. By the way, I come out on the side of freedom. So might you get things that are not true on a Tucker Carlson podcast? Of course you might get things that are untrue. If you're watching radicals in either direction and you don't realize that they might be lying to you, you've got a lot more problems in your life than just politics.
One thing I think that Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson get from having their own podcasts, from being their own bosses, essentially, is that they can really say whatever they want. Megyn Kelly in particular has gone so far as to endorse Donald Trump in the last election. She would prefer to put her biases out front and then let the audience decide.
The only way one succeeds in this medium is by violating all those rules that we used to have in journalism, where you don't really talk about yourself at all.
But she still considers herself a journalist, which I think is an interesting dichotomy. I think most journalists would say that the kind of work she does is really opinion and entertainment.
Kelly is one of a few women in a political podcasting space dominated by white men. What she has in common with many of her male peers, though, is a right-wing, specifically Trumpian, political position and a contempt for, quote-unquote, woke politics.
When I slipped and said the trans girls were biological males, this person told me that was offensive. Why did I have to deny reality in order to be polite?
Echoing Trump and riding on themes that he has made into prime clickable content, the chorus of right-wing podcasters rail against political correctness, so-called left-wing cancel culture, and what they say is a censorious media climate.
Their regular promotion of free speech is something that I think really appeals to a lot of their audience, which is, oftentimes largely male. I think it allows a lot of their viewers to feel comfortable, help them establish an ideology of pushing back against what they feel like is kind of woke, kind of cancel culture. And I think that it also has created some very, very strange moments.
If you talk to Hitler in 1941,
such as Lex Friedman's thinking out loud about how he would interview Hitler.
There is a strand within left-wing circles, which is, we don't talk to the other side. And the left wing will oftentimes tell you this. They'll say, Trump voters are racist and fascist, etc. That would be platforming them. I think that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. The left wing has to get way more inclusive. Who cares if you're talking to a right-winger? You also can talk. You can have a conversation. You can have a debate.
In the aftermath of Trump's return to the White House, a wounded Democratic Party has been scrambling to regain a foothold in U.S. public discourse. Podcasts are a big part of the strategy. Not only have leading Democrats suddenly made their presence felt in podcast studios, they're also hosting their own shows.
We need to change the conversation, and that's why I'm launching a new podcast. And this is going to be anything but the ordinary politician podcast.
The first episode of California Governor Gavin Newsom's podcast went online just a month after Trump was sworn in.
I think the strategy for Gavin Newsom makes sense. There's a real sense that he wants to run for president in the next election, and so this is a way for him to kind of develop a national profile. But it hasn't proven particularly successful yet. His approval ratings among Democrats have plummeted since he launched the podcast.
It's hard to tell right now if this is going to work out for Gavin Newsom, because the original pushback is, yes, from that contingent on the left, which is not insignificant, of how dare you talk to someone on the other side. We've got to get past that. It's poison. So he's right on that count, because people are thirsty for a dialogue. And he's doing the right thing by having conversations with both sides now.
Thank you for watching. Hit that like button and leave us a comment to let us know what you thought about anything we covered this week. And don't forget to follow us on social media. The links are in the description, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter for updates from the show.